Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's Monday, so that means we are starting the week with a discussion of the Clone Wars. But before we dive into that, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram, conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we'll be talking about episode 16 from season 1, which is called The Hidden Enemy. This will be a full spoiler discussion. I suspect anyone listening to this podcast has probably already seen it. It's been out for a dozen years or more. But yeah, with that having been said, Jay, you want to go ahead and give us a summary of this episode?
Sure thing. On the planet Christophsis, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker plan an ambush for a droid army only to see the ambush turned on them. When they return to Republic headquarters, they learn there is a traitor in their midst. As the Jedi set out to infiltrate the Separatist headquarters, Rex and Cody look for the traitor and discover it is a clone sergeant named Slick. Asajj Ventress attacks Obi-Wan and Anakin in order to stall them, while Slick destroys many of the Republic's weapons before Rex and Cody subdue him. As the episode ends, Slick accuses the Jedi of enslaving the clones, and the remaining Republic forces prepare for a major Separatist attack.
Yeah, so this is a prequel to the Clone Wars movie, and we are going out of order. And if you go check out the episode guide on StarWars.com, they make sure to make note of that this was the original anthology template that they had in mind for the Clone Wars, where these things are going to get jump around from time to time. And so again, this is one of a couple episodes actually that precede the movie that happened here on Christophsis. This is not the last time we'll see this setting in the Clone Wars here. But what do you think of that method of storytelling that they used here in this episode?
Well, when it first came out, I know I was really confused, thinking, okay, what? And it wasn't until years later that I realized that, all of these had bumped around and jumped around. I was just happy to gobble them up at the time, but I forgot how good this episode was. And I forgot how beautiful it is as well. And just how beautiful Christophsis is in this particular, way that we get to see it with the different buildings and whatnot, and how this absolutely sets up, some of those kind of philosophical debates, if you will, about the usage of clones and how they're portrayed and how they're treated, and everything going forward with clone psychology.
Yeah. That's something we're going to dive into here in just a bit more, because we've been talking a lot. That's been a theme of our coverage of the Clone Wars, as we've been doing that over the last several weeks. It's just kind of how the clones are portrayed and, their treatment by the Jedi. And they address that head on, as you were just saying here in this episode. This episode starts off, as you mentioned in our summary, with this ambush that Obi-Wan and Anakin are setting up. They're both in different towers. They've got a cannon that they're setting up, and then they're going to kind of catch these droids in the crossfire, only to find the droids go up the elevator and attack Obi-Wan's group. And then there's this cool little scene where Anakin and Rex and those clones use ascension cables, which we'll be talking about in our next episode, covering the Phantom Menace, to basically repel from one tower to the other to help out Obi-Wan. So there is a thing on the episode guide that talks about how instead of a cannon, the droids were initially going to be setting up a droid of their own called the Beast. And it was going to have all kinds of weapons attacked, and they were going to use that to fight the battle droids. But they ultimately dropped it because it kind of blurred the whole lines of, clones using a droid to fight droids. And they wanted it to be clones versus droids. And it ultimately didn't really matter to the story anyway. And that's why it didn't show up in this episode. But what do you think of that concept?
That is a very interesting concept. I guess I never really analyzed it to that extent in terms of, how droids using droids to fight clones and droids and all the things. But yeah, I like it. I think it's a cool concept that I understand why they didn't necessarily pursue it, but
Right.
yeah, I'm glad you pointed it out.
Yeah. And that character one of the clones' name is Chopper, which has got a neat coincidence to it. We'll
Yes.
get to in a second here.
Yeah.
But he was going to be one of the clones that was actually setting up the beast, only for it not to
Mhm.
work. So, anyways, we'll get back to that in a second here. And then we've got this notion that the droids somehow knew that they were coming, and they discover this because a clone named Gus, according to the episode guide, ripped the head off of a tactical droid, and then Rex and Cody performed what the episode. There's a lot of great terms on the episode guide. It was fun to read, but they performed what is called a robo-lobotomy on this
Yeah.
tactical droid in order to access its memory ranks. And they discover, that the tactical droid knew exactly where they were, and so they conclude that they have a traitor in their midst here. And as you were alluding to, Jay, this is kind of the first crack in all of this. We get a little bit of honoring the clones as individuals in the first episode of the Clone Wars where Yoda talks to him. But now we're starting to see even more individualized behavior, and personalities, and treating them as individuals. And it really comes about when Rex and Cody go to investigate this. We got Sergeant Slick and his squad, and we know the transmission came from their barracks. So, what did you kind of think of this presentation of this theme here?
Well, what I really thought was cool about this was a few things. First of all, just of course, you know how much I love clones just in general, but the fact that this episode definitely went above and beyond in trying to personalize them and talking about just their even quote unquote mundane everyday lives, as Rex and Cody are questioning them and saying, "Well, where were you and what were you doing?" And the one was like, "I went to the mess. I was hungry."
Hmm.
And then the other one was talking about how he was cleaning his gun and he made sure to do that. And then there was another one that was a little dicey about where he was and what he was doing, but it was because he was collecting droid fingers, which was not considered something that he was allowed to do. It was considered even an unforgivable crime kind of a thing, to
Hmm.
do these sorts of things. So it was showing and highlighting that as much as they were brothers, they were also human in their own ways. And that even though they were all the same and looked the same and talked the same, that they did desire some individuality. And to the extent for Slick that it was his downfall, and that he saw his brotherhood as more of a punishment than something that could be cherished and built upon.
Yeah, yeah, you hit on a bunch of it right there. It's like, because the one clone is like you said, he's got this habit. He cleans his gun after every single mission, and he was nervous about talking to Rex and Cody about that. No one else in the room was nervous, for
Mhm.
that reason. It's just like, you're my CEO, and you know, Rex points out, it's like, the way I see it, if you're telling the truth, you have nothing to be nervous about. But again, a clone is nervous. We don't really see that anywhere else at this
Yeah.
point with the Clone Wars. And then there's this notion that two of them are buddies and they go to the mess hall together. But yeah, they really strike out as they have the same voice, they look the same for the most part, except for in this group, you've got Chopper, who's got all the different scarring on his head,
Mhm.
and then you got Slick, who's got the little Arabesh S tattooed above his eyebrow and stuff like that. So, and then even Rex is standing in there, and he's got practically no hair. He's just got enough of
Mhm.
a stubble that looks like he's got a blonde platinum dye job or something on the top of his
Mhm.
head.
Well, he
But
is blonde, yeah.
yeah, but anyway, you get all this individuality amongst the clones, despite the overwhelming similarities they all share.
Yes, indeed. And I really appreciated the fact that they were highlighting all of those individualities too.
Right. But let's talk about Chopper for a bit. Of course, we all know the name Chopper as one of as the droid in Rebels that was Hera's little sidekick, and in Rebels, Chopper is a cantankerous little
Yeah.
murder bot, as he's come to be known by people. But it's not ironic, but it is a fun little coincidence that you have this almost aberrant clone using the same name here. And as you alluded to a moment ago, he's been collecting droid fingers, which is a reference to things that happened in Vietnam and other wars where soldiers were collecting ears and fingers and
Yeah.
things like that, body parts, and that was considered taboo
Oh,
and
no.
forbidden and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But it's just kind of what do you think of this notion that collecting droid fingers was considered to be so defective?
Yeah, it kinda struck me odd just because the fact that they call these droids clankers all the time, and they're so, you know, pardon the term, dehumanized. So what's the big deal about taking droid fingers? But I think it's not in and of the fact that where they come from, it's the symbolism of them
Yeah,
that
you're
they're
right on.
not supposed to yeah, they're not supposed to revel in the fact that they've done this. It's their duty, and they do it, and they are, eh, they're tasked with this because of the Republic, and that they shouldn't have trophies because of it, regardless of where they come from.
Right, right. It's what made me think of is like this notion that there's early warning signs, and so they're fighting droids now. But what if they were fighting something else?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like how does this person treat the dog? And
Mhm.
as well, if he does that to the dog, what's he going to do to a person? Et cetera, et cetera. Small animals and things like that. But at the same time, I still have sympathy for Chopper in this regard because he's clearly been through something. He's got those injuries. One of his eyes, there was a continuity issue there. His One of his eyes changes colors. They're both the same color, and then it kind of gets white. It kind of looks like maybe that eye has suffered some damage. It's on the same side of his
Mm.
head that has the scarring on it. So,
Hmm.
you can tell he's been through something, and this is kind of, as he says, I wanted something back.
Yeah.
It's hard not to have sympathy for someone who's been injured in war and wanting some sort of retribution for it.
Right, right, absolutely. And it's the same thing with them wanting to individualize themselves. I mean, it's just clones are human, they're people. And so regardless, and it's like a whole nature versus nurture thing. They all have their own experiences, and that's going to shape who they are and how they feel about themselves and everything going on around them.
Right, right. So let's step away from the clones for a second, and we'll come back to talk about Slick here in a minute. But Obi-Wan and Anakin go to track down where the signal was leading to, which basically leads them right into the Separatist headquarters here on Christophsis. And when along the way, they're noticing all these droids that are, peeking over bridges and around walls and stuff like that, and they're just casually remarking on it. It's like, looks like we picked up some followers. Yep, sure did. And
Yeah.
then they get to the headquarters and they walk in, and then Asajj comes walking out of the shadows. And so we get some fun scenes of them fighting. But the highlight of it, really, for me, is the banter between Asajj and Obi-Wan. And it's just like dripping with the sarcasm. It's like,
It's
my dear
flirting.
Obi-Wan, I'm all yours. And then, Obi-Wan kind of was like, yeah, I've missed you, my sweet. I mean,
Yep.
it's just the way that they talk to each other, and it's it's just it's fun to
It
see
is,
there.
it
Yeah.
is, and they've always had that banter, but, I mean, it is always for me, I still think it's a little bit of flirting, even though, I know Obi-Wan would never, but
Mhm.
even when she does drop her robe, you see him look her up and down, so I was just
Yeah.
giggling the whole time.
Y yeah, she did that in that fashion, for a very distinct purpose there.
Yep. I love the
No
sass.
Yeah, no doubt about it, but it's just so, again, it's so Star Wars. I mean, it is the bizarro Han and Leia flirting. when
Yeah.
it comes down to it. I mean, they'll use those nicknames, yes, your worshipness, and things like that. And,
Mm-hmm.
I am not a committee, and just the way they talk, they go back and forth. And those two actually like each other. And Obi-Wan and Ventress here are clearly on opposite sides, and they're swinging lightsabers at each other.
Yes. I love how she's poor Obi-Wan, you've been betrayed. And
Hmm.
then she says something like, "So hard to know who to trust these days, isn't it?" It's just, oh
Yeah.
God, I love it. It's so great.
And then they get out on they call it a couple different, like the Triwalker or something like that, or the Octatara droid is the other name for it. The big droid that's got the dome shaped top, and then it's got the
Mhm.
gigantic legs and stuff like that. And it reminded me at one point there was a Lego Star Wars game that counted on that focused on the Clone Wars. And this episode was like one of the entire they had like levels for a bunch of the different episodes, but this episode was featured in it. And I remember there was an entire fight of Anakin and Obi-Wan taking on Ventress as that droid was plummeting. There.
Oh.
Another part of that level was the escape from the towers when the gunship lands and Anakin and Obi-Wan have to retrieve the tactical droid's head, and it keeps
Mhm.
getting kicked around by the sheer number of battle droids that are there. And so you go pick it up, and then the next thing you know, you lose it and you have to go get it again. And but that was a fun level to play, especially with my boys when they were much littler than they are
That's
now.
awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so back to Slick. He gets approached by Rex and Cody, and he's told that they're going to interview his squad, and he immediately goes on the defensive. It's like, my guys, no way, they're the best. They wouldn't do this, and he's right. None of them did, because he ends
Right.
up being the traitor in all of this. But then he pleads, like, hey, he turns around and he sees his squad walking in, because Cody and Rex had called them all to come in so they could talk to him. And he's like, hey, just give me a few moments first, because this is going to hit them hard. And if you didn't already know that Slick was going to be the traitor, that's such a giveaway
Right.
right there. I mean, because like, no, why would we let you talk to your clone so you could all get your story straight? I mean, that just, uh, you know, I, he's caught off guard on this. But what did you think about this confrontation?
Well, I mean, if you look at it from a logistical point of view, he is only 10 years old. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so, as much as they've been trained to be soldiers and warriors, maybe not so much in the way of, the nuances of covering up your tracks. So, he just doesn't have the life experience, I don't think, to do that, number one. And it's just, yeah, I think it's just part of the storytelling too that it just comes out that way.
Hmm. But then they start the interrogation. We talked about that a bit. They're asking each one of the clones what they did when they got back. And the reason why they're doing this is because they found someone was listening in on their communicator. And before they could get that person tracked down, they ran off to the mess hall. Then, it's full of clones, and they couldn't tell who they saw. So no matter the fact that the clones are good at identifying each other on sight, despite the fact that they all have the same face, it wasn't a good enough look, for this, so this one clone could blend into the mess hall.
Mhm.
But everyone's focusing on Chopper, and it's simply because he's got the taboo droid fingers, and Slick has the slip of the tongue. He's like, we'll set up a proper investigation for you. You just got to wait till the Jedi get back. Well, they weren't supposed to know that the Jedi were gone, and the
Yeah.
only reason why Slick knows is because he listened in. One thing leads to another. They discover that it's Slick because he makes the slip, and then he leads them on a chase. He ends up sabotaging all the ATTEs and some gunships out in the weapons depot, and then he makes it back in and he hides. And then Rex and Cody basically set a trap. Cody's the bait, and Rex hides around the corner. When Slick reveals himself, they surround him, and after a brief combat, they get him subdued, and then he's in shackles when Anakin and Obi-Wan return. And Anakin makes this point of saying, like, you're a terrible disappointment to your brothers, which Slick scoffs at and says, that's something only a Jedi would say. He admits that he'd been offered money by Ventress, but it was something more important. It was freedom, and what he did was for all of his brothers because he loves them, and he basically accuses the Jedi of enslaving them. So, what did you think about that point of view that he has?
Well, it's very contradictory of itself just because the fact that he set these weapons off he sabotaged the weapons depot,
Hmm.
and that hurt his brothers. And
Yeah,
so, it's and to me, I'm wondering, I mean, clones really don't understand how do I want to put this? It's not that they don't understand the value of money, but they never had any use for it. So
right.
the greed of that doesn't seem like it jives with a clone's true nature. I can see the freedom, quote unquote, but then again, how is that helping his brothers by hurting them at the same time?
Well, my thoughts are this: I don't think the money was even really a consideration. Of course, it's something that Asajj would offer. She offered Gaius, that commando, the Senate guard, money in a
Right.
previous episode, and
That I
that's
could
what he was
see.
in it for.
Yeah.
And in this case, Slick kind of reminds me of Saw Gerrera in this regard. Saw Gerrera was, where the rebellion would not endorse his tactics because they're not sinking to the level of the empire of the opponent. Saw Gerrera says like, what's the line? He's like, he says it's like if you don't embrace their tactics, and then when you lose, you can take confidence while you're dying that you fought the war the right way.
Mhm.
And so I think
Mhm.
that's the way Slick is looking at this. Is like, yes, he's hurting some of his brothers, but he's cracking a few eggs to make an omelet.
Mhm.
And so it's like, yeah, these guys are going to lose, but the sooner the separatists win, the sooner my brothers aren't dying in a war at the bidding of the Jedi.
Mhm. Sacrifice a few for the good of the many.
Right.
Mhm.
But I don't really see it as the Jedi enslaving the clones. They're not, Sifo Dyas was manipulated into ordering this army by the Sith.
Mhm.
And so it's not, this is not something that the Jedi Council had sanctioned. Now, they are culpable because they did, in fact, decide to employ this army. But what choice did they have? Once the war
Right.
broke out, they were already there. So what are they going to do? Suddenly decommission the clones and leave the Republic exposed?
Right. Yeah, and
So
you wonder go ahead. I'm
no,
sorry.
no, no. I was just my last point was just going to be that yes, I can see the frustration of a clone here, but it's kind of hard to reason with a guy like that, but it's not entirely accurate.
Sure. And what I was gonna say was, you wonder who it was or how it was that Slick was kind of, fed this information in the first place. What planted the seeds for him to feel this way? Because obviously this is a very, kind of divergent way of thinking as opposed to everyone else that is a clone.
Well, Dave Filoni described it as Gone Django.
Ah.
It's in the featurette that there all these clones are based off the Django Fett template, and
Right.
Django is very much of a independent thinker when it came to that, and so they all have varying degrees of Django in them. Now, most of the clones have had successfully been engineered to be less independent and think like
Mhm.
that, which does kind of bolster Slick's argument there. But
True.
that was a trait that stood out in Slick and why he was so rebellious.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Makes
yeah.
sense.
I really like this episode. It's a lot
Me
of fun
too.
for different reasons. The opening battle is good. The cat and mouse with Slick between and Rex and Cody is fun to watch, and of course the fighting and banter between Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ventress. I mean, just that's first rate there.
Classic. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the last scenes of her are getting ready to go off to the monastery when they've captured Rhoda the Hutt that we see in the Clone Wars movie. So, and then we
Yep.
get to see the General Wortham Loathsome, I think is his name, who
It's
also,
warm, like warm loathsome.
yeah, Worm Loathsome, right, who has a pretty significant role in the first part of the Clone Wars movie as well. So, yeah, this is
Yeah,
pretty much a direct setup for that.
very much so. Very cool. And did you
Mhm.
notice the music when they were scuffling around? It was like, I think it was from Attack of the Clones, I want to
Yeah,
say.
that chase music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh huh. Yeah, that's the same music that or a version of it anyways, that they use in a lot of the audiobooks during the during the action sequences. If you've listened to enough of those,
Yeah,
you've heard
that's
that
true.
quite a bit. So,
True.
yeah. Well, any other final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Not really. I noticed, was it a poster of a handmaiden on the wall in the
Yeah, they
barracks?
had pin-up handmaidens and pin-up Twi'leks.
That cracks me up.
We've seen that a number of times with the
Yep,
clones. Yeah,
it
so,
cracks me up.
love them some Twi'leks.
But I do love Christophsis in this. It reminds me very much of, like, a futuristic 1950s. You know what I mean? With the Emerald City almost feel to it. I really, really appreciated the visualization of Christophsis, because you don't really get that in the Clone Wars movie. It's a different feel. It's a different aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and there's another reference to the movie made in there that, you know, their tanks and things have been destroyed. There's 1,000 battle droids headed that way, but they have their cannons. And that's also a pivotal thing that they're using to defend themselves as the battle droids march on them in the Clone Wars
Oh,
movie.
yeah. Yeah, good point.
So, yeah. Okay, then. Well, then that will do it for our discussion of this episode of the Clone Wars. We hope you've enjoyed it here on Podcast Stardust. And if you did, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the podcast and do things like, rate, review. And if we find those, then we'll love to read written reviews here on the podcast. And then if you got a moment, go over to retrozapp.com and check out all of our previous episodes, all 811 of them. We've been talking Star Wars now for over 5 years. We've covered all the episodes of The Mandalorian, basically all the live stuff that's been on Disney Plus, various movies. We've got other movie series that we've done for The Empire Strikes Back. It was the first one, and then we've done a movie a year for the last couple of years. A lot of Podcast Stars content over there, as well as content from other great podcasts such as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Case Files, Animaniacast, Brews and Blasters, Dork Lair, Doomcast, Enjoy Stuff, Love and Death Robots Plus, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails. So, Jay, you want to remind everybody where else we can be found online, social media, and our store and the like?
Sure thing. Very easy to do. We are on Instagram and Facebook at Podcast Stardust. And we also do have our Pinterest page with lots and lots of boards with all things Star Wars ideas. So check that out. You can also check out our 2 YouTube outlets. So we have our traditional YouTube channel as well as YouTube Music. So you'll get all of the episodes on both of those feeds. And we'd love it if you would like, subscribe, and share those out with your friends. And those also do support reviews and interactions as well. So as Dennis was mentioning, we would just love the interactions and just to hear what you think and just to leave us some comments. And we also have a way to connect with us on Discord. So we are part of the RetroZap Discord server. And if you want to do that, all you have to do is just hit up the link in our show notes. And another link you can hit up that also helps to support the show is our TeePublic store. So if you are in need of some sweatshirts, t-shirts, coffee mugs, stocking stuffers coming up for the holidays, or something for yourself, once again, you can hit up that link in our show notes and pick from one of 7 different show logo designs.
All right. Do you remind everybody what's going on in cosplay?
Sure. You can always catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay, and I am very eagerly awaiting the GalaxyCon Columbus weekend coming up here the first weekend in December. So I'll be covering that as well on my Instagram with all kinds of fun things and all of my adventures.
Okay. So upcoming on the show on Wednesday, it is the final episode of our The Phantom Menace series. So make sure you join us for that. It is a long episode, but it's a good one. We got a lot of great discussion there. And then on Friday, the current plan is to do an episode inspired by Black Friday. It's not about shopping and things like that, but you'll get it when you hear it. Just a disclaimer, these plans are tentative. There's a few things that are coming up that may set us back. Yeah, again, just check it out, and what comes out comes out. We'll just have to see. So that'll do it for episode 812 of Podcast Stardust. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and until next time, may the Force